everybody, I'm Kate Cast, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About, and welcome to the first installment of MCU TV. We're gonna kick off this new series with the very first Marvel Disney Plus series, Wandavision, a story that finds Wanda Maximoff and Vision, who's alive, living in quaint, low-stakes suburbia like something straight out of a classic sitcom. However, this isn't the true happily ever after it appears to be, as this perfect world collapses under the weight of questionable choices and pressures from the outside world. I was excited about the idea of getting to spend much more time with the MCU supporting cast, but out of all the shows announced for, let's call it the first wave, this was hands down the most baffling to me. I just didn't get it. Why are Wanda and Vision in a sitcom world? And isn't Vision dead?
He's supposed to be dead!
Yeah, weird.
What the hell is happening, and why are there 9 episodes of whatever this is? That might have been a harsh way to start this discussion, but it's important that you know my feelings going into the show to understand what I mean when I say that it's really remarkable how quickly the show sold me on itself. Despite the underlying mystery behind what's actually going on here, the first 3 episodes are played fairly straight. It's just a sitcom that happens to star a couple with superpowers. They completely immerse themselves in the world of classic sitcoms. It's kind of amazing how instantly endearing it is. And I think that comes down to the commitment they had to being authentic. As strange as I thought this premise was going in, seeing it in action made me realize that you could really only do this kind of situational comedy with Wanda and Vision. They're a weird couple, there's no denying that. But the idea of a newlywed couple consisting of a witch and a robot moving to the suburbs to live a normal life is ripped right from the pages of gimmicky sitcoms from the early days of television. You know, when your love interest was a genie and your best friend was a talking horse. Not to diss talking horses, of course. WandaVision fully leans into the sitcom format with the utmost sincerity. Even when cracks start to show, staying true to whatever era of television they find themselves in is a defining feature, with each episode, until the last 2, covering a different decade of sitcom television, from the down-to-earth yet still wacky situations of the 60s and 70s, to the more moral and emotion-driven stories of the 80s, all the way to the mockumentary style that was popular in the 2010s. Ha! Called it! I knew I'd get to satirizing that style soon. The sets look like they could have been pulled right out of an NBC or CBS warehouse. The evolution of the costumes keeps true to the styles of the time while keeping each character's color scheme consistent. The different opening theme songs written by the team behind the music for Frozen, Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, do a phenomenal job changing things up to suit the occasion, and only drives home how a good theme tune is such a lost art. But my favorite area of the production design has got to be the visual effects. The decision to have Wanda and Vision's powers brought to life with the same visual effects that would be available to television crews of the times was absolutely brilliant. Stuff like Wanda levitating things, clearly being held up by strings or moved with camera tricks, or Vision becoming a robot in disguise with just a crossfade and a simple animation is easily my favorite detail in the show from a production standpoint. They even put Sanka in the 2010s fridge. That's really cute. As cool as all that is though, looks can only get you so far. Thankfully, the performances and especially the writing keep up this dedication to accuracy. Every actor's delivery is true to the kind of comedic delivery during these eras of television. From the rapid corny patter to the dry sarcasm and mugging to the camera of a disgruntled parent, it all feels so genuine. I'm gonna be real. I've never been a fan of Wanda and Vision as a couple because it's weird. I don't care if it's from the comics, it's still weird. But seeing them in these scenarios, acting like a loving couple who would do the most ridiculous things to help each other, really endeared me to their romance. I can only imagine how much of a challenge that was for the actors to play essentially the same characters, but in vastly different ways. But Elizabeth Olsen, Paul Bettany, and even their not at all suspicious next door neighbor Agnes, played by Kathryn Hahn, rise to the occasion expertly, no matter what the show asks of them. But carrying all this wonderful talent is the writing. Once again, they stay so true to the writing of the sitcoms they live in for each episode, filled with domestic banter, secret-keeping hijinks, and once we hit the 70s, just the right dose of period-appropriate misogyny. As we all know, if you hold something large enough in front of you, no one can tell you're pregnant. Let me tell you the moment the show sold me on its concept. In episode 2, Vision swallows a piece of gum that travels into his stomach like literally grinding his gears, causing him to act weird because of the malfunction, and right before their big performance for the whole town. Oh no! It was ridiculous, and it fits this format perfectly. I absolutely adored it. Dropping these characters, who usually deal with world or even universe-ending level threats, into a world full of low-stakes yet absurd antics has a real charm to it. As you can tell, it won me over pretty quickly, especially as a fan of a lot of these classic sitcoms. As much as I was perplexed by the show as it was being sold to me, now that I was watching it, if all the show was Wanda and Vision being an unusual couple trying to fit in small town America, I think I would have been perfectly okay with that. But that's not what this is. They're not a normal couple despite how Wanda wants things to appear, and something is without a doubt amiss. The show does such a good job endearing the audience to this unconventional installment in the MCU that when the cracks start to show at the end of episode 1, it's pretty chilling and snaps the viewer back to the fact that this isn't right. The cracks only become more visible in the following episode until the end, when Wanda sees someone in town she doesn't recognize, and this happens.
No.
Oh, it's House of M. This, I imagine, is what hardcore comic fans were exclaiming when that happened. Heck, even I know House of M. Mostly thanks to the Attack the Fourth Wall episode on it, but still. At the time, this was just a point to support a theory, though. For the first 3/4 of the show, it's not entirely clear what's going on or what's causing all this, but it quickly makes you pay attention to the little stuff to try and figure out what exactly is happening. As a result, the few moments where reality breaks through, even for a moment, can be absolutely chilling. This is the kind of horror angle that, when done correctly, can be the most spine-chilling and rewarding, making the most wholesome and innocent things absolutely terrifying to go near, and once you do, there is no escape. All the townspeople of Westview are average people under some kind of spell. The further from Wanda's neighborhood you go, the less sophisticated the people's actions are, but they still have to play along in these truly disturbing repeated motions, or frozen in place, unable to act. It's fitting for the Halloween episode because this is spooky. The second act of the show is filled with terrifying moments of clarity at the dark underbelly of this real-life daydream. The intrigue from viewers got very high, very fast. Why are some things in color? Why do some of the townspeople speak really cryptically? Who is watching all this from afar on television? Besides us, I mean. Because it wasn't just the audience who was observing all this so closely, there were others trying to unravel this as well, including someone right in the town of Westview, Geraldine, or should I say, Monica Rambeau, played now by Teyonah Parris. At the end of episode 3, we get our first look at the world outside of the small town sitcom, which is behind some sort of strange force field being observed / guarded by Sword, who Monica works for. Leading us into episode 4, our first story to take place completely outside of Westview, back into a more traditional MCU story. We all remember the moment where half the Marvel universe was turned to dust in front of our eyes. In fact, I don't think any of us will ever forget, but once that was reversed in Endgame, we didn't really see them get undusted. The first time we see anyone who returned, they're rallying around the Avengers to fight Thanos, which was iconic and certainly the right call for that movie, but the closest we got to seeing what that felt like for those who vanished was this gag at the beginning of Spider-Man Far From Home. During Monica's story, however, we get to see how that 5-year gap felt to someone who was blipped, complete with this absolutely stunning shot of Monica being brought back into existence. We knew they didn't age, but I somehow didn't put together that they didn't feel any time pass. As far as they were aware, 5 years went by in a blink, which is a real shock to Monica because she was in the hospital when Thanos snapped his fingers. Not for herself, but looking after her mom, Maria, who was making a decent recovery 5 years ago, but passed away while Monica was gone. This is so devastating, and yet it's brilliant. I don't even know where to begin. Alright, this is a huge show. I'm gonna try to keep this brief. If you've seen any of my other Marvel reviews, you know that I adore how well thought out the consequences from the main story are in the rest of the universe, meaning that Monica comes back in a very average place, witnessing the chaos of half the population suddenly reappearing and having to process losing her mother in what was to her an instant. This might be a better conversation for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but the logistics of things like reintegrating a group of people who vanished for half a decade back into everyday life are really interesting to me. Monica is denied a promotion and has to take orders from this guy, Director Hayward, boo, played by Josh Stamberg, because she was gone. But despite her disadvantages and still grieving over her mother, she gets back to work as soon as she can with S.W.O.R.D., which in the MCU seems to be the equivalent to S.H.I.E.L.D., but in space. Huh. Sword and Shield. How about that? Funny that the cinematic universe wants an organization based around space exploration now. I wonder what for. Anyway, Monica's first assignment back is investigating a strange anomaly in New Jersey. Luckily, she's not investigating this alone. A really fun twist once we get back to the outside world is seeing some familiar faces investigating the anomaly, or Hex as they later call it. With the return of FBI agent Jimmy Woo, who if he wasn't played by Randall Park, I honestly would have completely forgotten about, and they even bring back everyone's favorite character, Darcy. Once again, this show did the impossible. It made me like Darcy a lot. She's gone from being the snarky, flighty assistant to far more capable characters to being an accomplished scientist in her own right. She single-handedly figures out what's going on the other side of the hex. But the best part is, she's still Darcy. She has no filter, she butts in anywhere she feels like, and gets really invested in the Wandavision sitcoms as S.W.O.R.D. monitors them. It's amazing how much more charming those character traits become when you can do stuff. Maybe that's how Tony got away with so much. It's also nice to see Agent Woo get more involved. Like Monica and Darcy, he wants to do what's right so much, he's willing to go against orders to do it, beating up a few S.W.O.R.D. agents at one point to do just that. Way to go, man! He's also much more fair when recapping Wanda's history when Hayward is ready to paint her as a villain. I really appreciated that, and it made me sympathize with a character that, again, I almost completely forgot existed. Whenever a past character reappears post-Endgame, some fans will question if that character was blipped or not. And considering how much more advanced Darcy's education is, and that Agent Woo was able to master that card trick Scott showed him, I'm gonna assume they were not. Once these three get on the same page and start working together, they become something of a force to be reckoned with, and the background heroes of the series. I could honestly watch a whole show just about these three. Actually, Monica is probably going to be busy with her movie appearance, so just make it about these two. I'm cool with that. But the MVP here is without a doubt Monica. You might remember when I reviewed Captain Marvel, I commented on how much I would enjoy seeing Monica again in the current storyline, all grown up. And this was before I knew she got superpowers in the comics. This is that desire realized, and it does not disappoint. Monica grew up to be a capable, dedicated, empathetic person that I bet her mom and Aunt Carol would be very proud of. Monica goes through her own sense of growth alongside Wanda as they keep encountering each other, dealing with past loss around losing her mother, 5 years of her life, and she's even implied to have some kind of resentment towards Captain Marvel, or at least some unresolved issues with her Aunt Carol that leaves her feeling cold whenever she's brought up.
Nobody else came close.
Well, I'd argue that Captain Marvel came close.
We are not talking about her.
In that pursuit to stand up for someone who truly needs help, Monica discovers a power all her own, as the Hex manipulates her DNA, and crossing it again after already going through twice could result in permanent mutation. But Monica knows what the right thing to do is here. If she wants to help Westview and Wanda, she's more than willing to take the risk. With pure determination and the inspirational voices of her loved ones echoing in her head, in what is perhaps one of the most triumphant moments in the MCU's history, Monica goes full-on superhero, complete with glowing eyes and the instinct to crouch pose.
She gonna do superhero landing. Wait for it.
Woo!
Superhero landing.
Monica's involvement in the story could have easily been superficial sequel bait, but instead, her time here plays a vital role in the story, gives us a stellar introduction that would leave many audience members wanting more, and is the kind of support that was incredibly important to the greater conflict underneath the story. By the halfway point of the series, the show is split between Wanda and Vision in the slowly deteriorating sitcom universe, and the people of S.W.O.R.D. on the outside trying to figure out what's going on for many different reasons. While episode 4 gave us a better sense of what exactly is happening, it also raises a lot more questions, like why and how. Several tests are conducted by SWORD to establish any kind of contact with Westview, but are made more difficult by the fact that anything or anyone who passes through the hex is immediately integrated into the television world, meaning they warp in appearance to fit the time period. Monica wasn't even undercover. When she passed through the hex, it pretty much brainwashed her, until she was able to recall details from the outside world, and Wanda freaking yeets her out of town. It makes the backstory and answers we do get in episode 4 pretty eerie and confusing, because all fingers point to one person at the heart of it all: Wanda. As SWORD continues to interfere, she's forced to confront them face to face. I gotta admit, once Wanda stepped through the hex, I was kind of shocked, because at that moment, a lot of doubt was washed away. It's finally clear she's at least aware of what's happening and is not only okay with it, but will defend it by any means necessary. A threat she can hold to with a simple wave of her hand, as Hayward is very effectively reminded of.
And no one will ever take it from me again.
Somehow, Wanda has the perfect life right now. A husband, a home, and now children. Her and Vision's twin boys, Billy and Tommy. Which is where we know this is a fantasy of some kind, because otherwise, I don't know how that would even be possible, and I'm not sure I want to know. This is why Wanda and Vision as a couple weirded me out for so long. But as a plus, they do allow the show to cover family-centered sitcom tropes. I personally thought it was clever for these challenges to come in during the very special episode homage, where Wanda, right after she threatens the life of the person who can tear this perfect life away from her, lectures her boys on not running away from feeling sad after their dog dies. Irony, thy name is Maximoff. That said, while Wanda definitely has some control, or at least awareness over what is happening here and doesn't want to change it, it's not quite clear just how much control she has over all this until episode 8 of the 9-episode series. Until then, the show does a pretty good job at casting doubt over who is really responsible for all this. Perhaps the best example is when they pitched the curveball that even Wanda didn't see coming. They brought in Pietro.
But probably not the one you're expecting.
Most of you were probably there when this happened, which is good because I don't think I can accurately describe the levels of mind-blowing excitement that occurred when this guest appearance happened. Evan Peters playing Quicksilver in the MCU got a lot of people really excited, especially considering that at the time, the multiverse was an unexplored concept that we knew was coming, we just didn't know when or how. With that being the case, it might have been obvious what was going on here, but it still added fuel to the already massive bonfire of fan theorizing at the time. What was Fox Pietro doing here? Did Wanda do this, or did someone else? She seems more confused about this appearance than anything else that's happened so far, as she lightly interrogates him pretty much any chance she gets.
What happened to your accent?
What happened to yours?
It was a very clever plot twist to include, and one that might not have had the most satisfying resolution to some, but it's still pretty neat and likely got the desired reaction in the moment, which was pretty fun to watch. Though as cool as Peters is in this part, the frat boy energy was testing my patience at points. What makes it work in the story, however, is that Wanda seems just as confused as we are by Pietro's sudden reappearance. Up to this point, Wanda had some awareness of what was happening, which is what made her so sus. Even Vision spends this portion of the show investigating for himself after he sees that whatever is happening here, it's hurting people, despite the Stepford smiles they're all forced to wear. Between the conflict this causes in Wanda and Vision's relationship, the fact that their children seem to be free-willed and developing powers of their own, SWORD trying to break through by force any chance they get, and the surprise cameo by Pietro, the facade behind Westview slowly but surely begins to crumble. The sitcom world only gets more unstable as a result of Wanda trying to hold things together, expanding the borders to engulf most of the SWORD agents, including Darcy. That's not great, but a pretty fun excuse for a callback. I think we all know where this is going.
Can I help you, Creeper?
Or not. Okay, this might be petty and definitely not important in the grand scheme of the show, but how do you zap Kat Dennings into a sitcom universe and not make her a waitress? That was handed to you on a literal silver platter and you just ignored it. Not since the refusal to use the obvious Sherlock Holmes reference in Infinity War have I seen such a wasted opportunity in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, I'm not great at this gig, I gotta be honest. It doesn't really speak to my skill set.
Anyway, as you might remember, as the show progressed, there were a lot of wild fan theories going around. Conspiracies about what was really going on behind the scenes of this superhero sitcom. In between the disappointment that the aerospace engineer that Monica knew was just some random person, and the upcoming disappointment concerning Pietro, there was one moment at the end of episode 7 where theorists all over got to stand up and loudly proclaim, "I knew it!"
You didn't think you were the only magical girl in town, did you?
Wanda envisions helpful, enthusiastic, smart-mouthed next-door neighbor Agnes is indeed a witch herself by the name of Agatha Harkness, who is apparently from the comics too. I wouldn't know, I never heard of her before, but I commend the hardcore comic fans and theorists for finding the clues here. In between Kathryn Hahn absolutely nailing what might be the most demanding role in the MCU so far in terms of range, and the theme song Agatha All Along, which could stand proudly next to any classic Disney villain song, Agatha reveals a lot about the mystery behind what's been happening by not really being involved. At least not in a major sense. Watching Wanda confront Agatha after she shows her true colors really puts a lot into perspective. Mostly how little Wanda understands her own powers. I'll go more into the why in a minute, but yes, for both of you who didn't know, Wanda changed Westview into the perfect sitcom town all on her own. What helped contribute to the mystery in the 7 episodes before that becomes clear is that even Wanda's not entirely sure how she did this. When Agatha sensed some major spellcasting going on, she was able to swoop in and manipulate things with only a little suspicion from Wanda because if she's not sure how she did this, who knows what could really happen? Meeting someone who understands magic much more than she does makes it very clear how much she doesn't know. We don't even know what this version of Wanda is capable of. Not really. This will become something of a running theme in the Marvel Disney Plus shows from 2021. Until now, Wanda was a side character who didn't have the dedicated screen time to emphasize these things. She's definitely strong, but they've never really elaborated on just what the extent of her powers is. Which I'm sure on some level was intentional, since Wanda is technically an X-Men character, and the rights around that group were kinda sketchy for a while. But now we don't have to worry about that. Even Agatha, skilled witch that she is, doesn't understand how Wanda did all of this. That's why she's here and why she's been interfering. She knows it's really complicated and impressive, and made sure the illusion didn't break before she could find out how Wanda pulled this off. So let's follow in Agatha's footsteps and explore the long-awaited why, as the penultimate episode of Wandavision turns into the most tragic episode of This Is Your Life ever, for all 7 of you who get that reference.
So come on up, because this is your backstory.
Like I said, Wanda was a side character. We knew enough about her to care about her as a character, but her story was never important enough to spend time diving deep into it like with the lead heroes. This is where that changes. Getting to see and feel Wanda's past play out in front of us that we'd only heard about before is pretty exciting and surprisingly emotional. I mean, maybe it's not too surprising. We knew that Wanda had a tragic past, how her parents were killed in war-torn Sokovia by a Stark Industries bomb, their voluntary experimentation with Hydra. For a while, they don't tell us much of anything we don't already know. But I don't know, there's something about witnessing it that makes it feel more personal and tragic. Things like seeing the Maximoff family bonding watching sitcoms in the middle of a war zone, or witnessing the moment where Wanda's powers truly awaken thanks to that pesky Infinity Stone, makes it easier to empathize with Wanda when we can watch these events play out rather than just being told about them. What we do learn that's new is that Wanda has apparently always had some magical powers. She just wasn't aware of it. In fact, if it wasn't for Hydra's experiments, her magic likely would have remained dormant or even dissipated from lack of use. But because of the circumstances, they only grew. I don't think the same thing goes for Pietro, but I'm not 100% positive about that. Some have argued that this is annoying because it's a retcon to Wanda's origin stories in the MCU, and yeah, maybe it is a little, I guess. But like I said, they never really told us much about Wanda or her powers besides the basics anyway.
He's fast and she's weird.
So it doesn't really bother me. I find digging into all this more interesting than anything else. As this blast of the past goes on, we even get a look into new parts of her history, like her early days at the Avengers compound, shortly after Age of Ultron, and after losing the only family she had left, giving us this really nice personal moment between Wanda and Vision, the two newest members who just went through life-altering changes, finding comfort and support in each other. As much as I was endeared to them during WandaVision, I think this is the moment where I finally understood Wanda and Vision's romantic relationship. Despite the fact that it's still a weird pair from the outside, on the inside, there's a genuine connection and understanding between them. Combined with Olsen and Bettany's chemistry, it feels so real and genuine. Getting to see perhaps the moment where this love sparks is really something special. Only to be reminded immediately after that it was destined to end in tragedy, because once this show starts digging into the heart-wrenching trauma, it does not let up. The most important part of watching all these events in Wanda's life one right after the other is that we start to notice an important connection. That everyone Wanda has ever loved is gone. Every time she finds some happiness, it's taken away, leaving her with nothing but emptiness and sorrow. There has been a lot of discussion and analysis about how Wandavision, and specifically Wanda Maximoff, portrays the very real and persistent struggles that come with grief. I could reiterate what other people have said, or even put my own spin on it, but honestly, I think I'd just be butchering what's already been said perfectly. There are a ton of videos and articles about this, but I'm going to link you to this video by Cinema Therapy. Personally, it's the best look I've seen at the topic so far. Rather than even attempt to tackle the broader theme of dealing with grief in the series, I'm going to keep the analysis specifically about Wanda. But even with that restriction, there's still a lot to work with, because her whole life could easily be defined by losing those closest to her, with a major focus on how it felt for her to lose Vision. I didn't realize this until much later, but that amazing moment in Endgame where Wanda practically rips Thanos apart for killing Vision, that was right after she was blipped, which, as we've seen, happened in the blink of an eye for anyone who vanished. So for Wanda, it was only a few minutes before that she watched that behemoth kill the love of her life in cold, well, circuits, I guess. So in a world of people reuniting with loved ones after years apart, Wanda is there alone. Again. All she wants is to give Vision a burial and herself closure. So she goes to Sword, who has Vision's body. Okay, time out. Anyone who's talked to me about the show much at all knows that this is the one area that annoys me relentlessly. How did Sword get a hold of Vision? I find it very hard to believe that Tony or the authorities in Wakanda, where Vision was killed, would have willingly handed that sophisticated technology or that much vibranium over to a place like Sword, regardless of the state the world was in the last 5 years. Did they just get a really good deal at the Stark estate sale or something? If anyone else noticed an explanation that I missed, feel free to share, but in the meantime, what the heck? Either way, it's an acquisition that creates an inner and outer conflict for Wanda as she witnesses the frankly horrifying sight of Sword disassembling Vision for parts like a worn down car. But I really like the scene because at first, it's tough to tell what the right point of view is here. Did Wanda project so much of her own need for affection on him that she forgot that he wasn't human and thus not worth the same level of respect? Or does Hayward not see that Vision was more than just a hunk of vibranium with a powerful AI installed in it? That he was capable of feeling and thinking, and as a result should be treated as more than just a resource. Now, given that Wanda is our protagonist, Vision was a fairly beloved character, and Hayward has been, to be frank, a colossal ass for as long as we've known him, the answer might be obvious. But the way it shatters Wanda's world, and given what she does to cope later, it's pretty gut-wrenching to even raise that question. Almost as if this whole thing was destined to fail because of what Vision was, and she was fooling herself into believing she could find love and happiness again. Made explicitly clear with an absolutely devastating callback to their connection and how it's no longer there. Just in case you thought the show was going to leave any of your heart intact by the end.
I can't feel you.
WandaVision is a lot of things, but in this aspect, it is especially especially cruel, spending all this time showing us how happy they are together, only to remind us of how it was always destined to end. You wanna know why Wanda was in this random town in New Jersey? Because Vision had bought them a plot of land to build a home together on, where they could be together for the rest of their days, where Wanda is now standing all alone. No family, no friends, no loved ones, no home. In that dark place, Wanda just can't take the grief anymore. Consumed in her complete and utter sadness at having nothing left, Wanda's full powers come to the forefront. In a truly remarkable couple of minutes, her love for Vision creates a completely new version of him, and a life that is fun and innocent, and most importantly, can't hurt her anymore. These few moments are incredibly emotional, shocking to watch unfold, beautifully executed without a single line of dialogue spoken from when Wanda enters Westview to when her sitcom world is completed, brought to the peak of tragedy by Elizabeth Olsen's performance, adding so much clarity to the events of Wandavision. Wanda has been through so much tragedy and loss in her life. Through it all, she turned to television for comfort. Those wacky primetime network shows where things got ridiculous, but they always worked out in the end. No matter what happened, everyone would be together and happy in time for the credits to roll. The mental escapism that can be found in entertainment to alleviate the struggles of the real world for a bit has now, quite literally, become an escape from a world that has not been kind to Wanda Maximoff. And for a while, that works, but things fall apart quickly. No matter what, though, Wanda refuses to let it go, insisting that she has everything under control over and over and over again. Because, as we all know, if you just repeat, "I'm fine" enough times, it'll come true. She may not have meant for this to happen, or even fully understand how she did it, but with all of this pain Wanda has felt for most of her life, can you really blame her for not wanting to give up what is to her a second chance? It'd be tough to ask that of anyone. Now, this isn't a new storyline by any stretch of the imagination. Heck, I've covered similar plots once or twice in older videos, but the way it's executed in WandaVision is just so effective and really resonated with many viewers. It's a truly immersive story brought to life through some of the most stunning visual storytelling the MCU has produced so far. It also helps that powerful magic being controlled by even more powerful emotions is one of my favorite tropes ever. I think it's a great shorthand to show how much overwhelming emotion can affect the world around you at times. WandaVision may be one of the best examples of this in recent memory, if not of all time. I'm also pretty fond of the sticking a character into an elaborate fantasy to work out an inner conflict story device too. What can I say? I know what I like. However, while the show, and in particular the penultimate episode, do a spectacular job at taking us through Wanda's history and giving us insight into why things wound up the way they have, it doesn't excuse what Wanda has done to this town. In the middle of all these women's clubs and Halloween parties were people who were brainwashed to follow the script Wanda laid out. Just because Wanda didn't have any malicious intent when creating the sitcom paradise, that doesn't mean she doesn't have to confront what she's done and is still doing to these people. She may have given everyone a better life in a cleaner town with fewer problems, but that still doesn't make it okay, because they were denied something very important: choice. They were forced to play out Wanda's domestic AU fanfic against their will. The show is very clear about how wrong that was, and yet some fans thought that just because her motives were portrayed as sympathetic, that the show was waving off Wanda's actions like,
I'm just a girl in love. La 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 lovey-dove. I can't be held responsible for my actions.
Some fans thought that after all this, Wanda gets off scot-free, that she didn't suffer any consequences because she wasn't arrested or reprimanded or contained in any way. But that argument rings hollow to me. In the final episode, these people are given the chance to make their suffering clear to her face. And I personally think Wanda having to stare these people who she manipulated and kind of held hostage, hear from them what she was really putting them through, and taking the opportunity to make things right even when it's hard for her, is much more effective than any conventional punishment. Most of the criticisms towards WandaVision tend to be aimed at the final episode. That's one of them. The biggest one I saw, though, is that the final episode becomes a bit too typical Marvel. What were up to this point very internal and complex problems presented in subversive and unconventional ways for the genre could apparently be solved by blasting outside forces in the face. I kinda get where people are coming from, given how tame and different the rest of the show has been, but I still think these fights tie into the show's overall narrative, mainly because of who they're fighting and why. This isn't putting all the blame on outside entities to make Wanda look like a hero by comparison, or making a spectacle that insults the audience's investment or intelligence. It represents what Wanda and Vision have been struggling with their entire lives, being seen as weapons or tools, not people, in a show that has humanized them more than probably any of their previous appearances. Agatha shows up not just to understand how Wanda achieved such powerful magic, but to take it for herself. Hayward was tracking Vision inside the Hex all this time to figure out how Wanda brought him back to life, only to reconstruct his original body to be used as purely a weapon, White Vision. Another reference I didn't get until comic fans pointed it out. Neat. At one point, Agatha compares the soldiers after Wanda to witch hunting, and she kind of has a point. Outside forces in the MCU have vilified Wanda any chance they got pretty much since her introduction. Wanda and Vision's feelings don't matter to either of them. They're just a means to an end, which is why Monica's role in the show is so important. Even when Wanda doesn't want it, even when Hayward sabotages every attempt for her to try, Monica still wants to help Wanda, make her see reason, and help her to heal, no matter what that means for her. Monica understands why Wanda did this, admitting in the end that if she had the power to live in a world free of grief and tragedy, she couldn't say she wouldn't have done the same thing. And honestly, how many of us could say that? From Sword ripping Vision apart as if he wasn't a sentient being and then rebuilding his skeleton into a robotic husk, to when Agatha discovers that Wanda is
The Scarlet Witch.
Talking over and over again about how Wanda has untold power that exceeds the Sorcerer Supreme, and that she's a dangerous being meant to destroy the world and apparently has no say in any of this. The show keeps reinforcing this view towards two of the MCU's most powerful characters with no regard for who they are as people. Side note, I somehow didn't realize until this show that they never called Wanda Scarlet Witch in the MCU before. I guess Hayward asking if she had a funny nickname was foreshadowing. Anyway, Wandavision, with its 9-episode run and with its final episode in particular, sets out to show what makes Wanda and Vision strong, human characters worth all this care and investment from the audience. So before we see how Wanda's story resolves, let's talk a bit about Vision. I haven't really talked about Vision much yet, despite the fact that he's Shira's first billing, but that's because talking about Vision in this show is difficult. In the beginning, he plays the role of loving robot husband and attentive father and does a really good job at it. Watching Vision being really protective and getting wrapped up in sitcom shenanigans is really fun and adorable. However, once the cracks in Westview's facade start showing, he has trouble not seeing what's on the other side. And once those suspicions creep in, he dedicates himself to figuring out what's going on and how to help these people who are clearly suffering. Learning what we do during Wanda's backstory, he's not quite the Vision who lived and died in the MCU. He was created from Wanda's loving memories of him, so he's someone else entirely. Kind of. Seeing him grapple with his past life he can't remember, discovering that he's supposed to be dead, yet still pushing through to help even if it rips him apart, is tough to watch at times. Although watching Darcy try to explain his history is pretty hilarious.
So, Wanda killed me?
Yes. But it's not that simple. You asked her to do it.
This only got more heartbreaking for me once we found out what he is. We think it's hard for Wanda to have everything taken away. Imagine finding out that your mere existence is imagined and highly conditional. Vision coming to terms with who he is comes to the forefront once he faces off against White Vision, who was made from the original Vision's body but retains none of his feelings or memories. All that's inside him is the objectives given to him by Sword and Hayward. So in between punches, he uses the best tool the Vision has at its disposal: philosophy.
This is why everyone hates moral philosophy.
One of the things I loved about Vision as a character ever since he debuted in Age of Ultron was the more philosophical side to him, a trait they reminded us of in the flashbacks earlier in what is perhaps the best scene in the entire show. By trying to understand what Wanda is feeling, someone who's been through so much in her life, as an observer who has only begun to live and thus has had nothing to lose yet, Vision helps her find something to live with what she's lost. lost. What is grief if not love persevering has become the most iconic quote from the series and one of the most beautiful and meaningful lines of dialogue I've ever heard. It embodies everything that is wonderful about Vision, everything this version of the Hex still carries inside. He doesn't have Vision's memories, but he's everything Wanda loved about him, including being able to guide her to do the right thing, especially when it's hard for them. The ship of thesis argument he poses against White Vision is the perfect example of what makes Vision great. Philosophical questions posed to solve a problem or understand something that should be simpler, yet is actually far more complicated than him. Or them now, I guess. Right now, these are both Vision, and yet neither of them are Vision. They both have components of the original Vision, but since Hex Vision has by this point discovered what has to be done to Westview, he ends his fight with White Vision by making him see reason and restoring his memories in a pretty exciting moment in my opinion. I know it can feel cheap to undo character deaths, especially when the cause was self-sacrificing, which makes it only feel like momentary sacrifice, but I think Vision gets a pass considering what he is and the lengths they had to go to get him back. They went through so much trouble to bring him back, only for him to fly off the second he remembers who he truly is. I'm sorry, but what? Where did he go? Hey Viz, you want to mention to your girlfriend / possible wife who started all this because she was heartbroken by your death that you're alive and well? Okay, guess not. I suppose we can save that for another miniseries. Whatever. Back to the Witch in Charge, where everything Wanda's been dealing with, or rather not dealing with, is coming to a head in this battle against Agatha as she tries to take her magic, constantly finding herself outmatched at every turn while being forced to confront the true consequences of her actions, trying to reclaim something she never really had. All this time, Wanda's been in active denial of who she is, of what she's capable of, and what she's lost. She hasn't forgotten about it, but she either didn't understand it, like with her magic, or she thought she could fix it, like making a family to replace the one she lost. But in the end, this situation she created is hers to fix, by coming to terms with the realities of the present and trying to make up for her past mistakes. By learning, accepting what happened, and doing her best to improve and move forward. By letting the townspeople leave after she realizes they're suffering. By being intuitive and using Agatha's own magic lessons about runes against her, which was a fantastic reveal by the way. And by deciding that, even if she has a powerful family now, she has to face this on her own. It's only through accepting herself does she become what she was always meant to be on her terms, the Scarlet Witch. Now that we've reached this moment, can we just take a second to appreciate the costume? The Scarlet Witch outfit looks amazing. Another home run for Marvel's costume department. Way to make a costume that looked absolutely ridiculous a couple episodes ago and give it an incredible upgrade. They even made that silly crown look cool in live action. How? Forget Comatage, the costume department is where the real wizards are. I really like the way they dispose of Agatha too. Wanda may be strong and merciful, but she's not forgiving. And now she knows a good resource when she sees it. Getting rid of Agatha by turning her into Agnes, keeping her tucked away just in case she might need her help again. And I get the feeling she might. So thanks to Wanda realizing her true power, Vision coming to terms with his own identity, and with some help from the supporting cast, the day is saved. Monica steps in to help with her new powers, and discovers that fake Pietro is just a random Westview citizen Agatha brainwashed with the worst name ever.
You're Ralph Boner?
Boner.
If you listen closely, you can hear so many Marvel fans groaning with disappointment. Agent Wu exposes Hayward's true intentions to his superiors, proving that he is a true master of sleight of hand now, and Hayward gets one last blast of karma when Darcy rams into his car with a freaking ice cream truck. That was awesome. Did I just say Darcy did something awesome? What has this show done to me? But this isn't a total victory. Wanda making things right means restoring everything to the way it was, which means the Hex and everything created inside has to vanish. These final moments with the Maximoff family are so sad and just how subdued they are. After spending all day flying around shooting lasers and beating things up, the family just walks home quietly as the sun sets. They spend all this time endearing us to Billy and Tommy and showing them as capable heroes heroes to be, only to comfortably remind us that they won't exist in a few minutes. Wanda and Vision enjoy every last moment of peace and quiet in their perfect suburban life, maybe even hoping for a second that it'll work out like it does on TV. That no matter what, at the end of the day, they can come home and watch TV together. But as the hex closes in outside, all they're watching is each other. Their final goodbyes are, like every moment involving these two in the show, beautiful, loving, and utterly heartbreaking. It almost had me crying my eyes out at 4 o'clock in the morning, so thanks for that show. To do what's best for everyone here, and even what's best for herself, Wanda can't keep the family she's made here. She has to move on, and unfortunately, she has to do that alone, sacrificing everything to make things right. And she's not rewarded for doing so. The people of Westview still fear and hate her, and if she wasn't encouraged by Monica to leave, she might have been taken in by the authorities. She's right back where she started before this happened, except now she's not suppressing her pain or her capabilities. It's a bittersweet ending for sure, but while Wanda might not be in a happier place from when the show began, I think she's in a healthier one. However, the show ends with the possibility that this might not be the last we see of Billy, Tommy, or even Vision.
We have said goodbye before, so it stands to reason.
We'll say hello again.
In the meantime, overall... Okay, I'm gonna warn you guys right now. This is probably going to be the longest installment of MCU TV for a while because there's just so much here. Wandavision is so ambitious and encompasses so much in its 9-episode run, yet it pulls it all off spectacularly. From unconventional yet incredibly accurate recreations of television sitcoms to borderline horror, with typical Marvel stakes building on well-woven continuity and displaying the strengths of branching out the Marvel Cinematic Universe even farther. By exploring minor characters more and tackling difficult topics with great respect and nuance that could genuinely help people watching. The production value, the acting, the writing, the fan service, the seamless shifts in tone and genre, even with some plot holes and lackluster payoffs, some that bother me and some that don't, everything here is a triumphant effort that just works so well. It's no wonder the show got so much awards recognition, even if it was just a bunch of nominations, and had so much more broad appeal than the typical Marvel fare, including the Marvel shows that followed. Even if it wasn't intended to be the first Disney Plus show, it was actually supposed to go second, WandaVision was the perfect start to this mini-series experiment, demonstrating the strengths of a serialized story in this universe and being a celebration slash deconstruction of television and its possible audience. After what turned out to be the longest hiatus in new MCU releases since the gap between the Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2 due to the pandemic, WandaVision on the surface was possibly a risky way for Marvel to make their big comeback. But this is an excellent example of how the biggest risk can reap the greatest rewards. One of those risks was the week-by-week releases, which is unusual in the binge-watching culture we've created around streaming, but I think benefits these projects in the long run. Releasing episodes the old-fashioned way kept anticipation and engagement with WandaVision high and enthusiastic throughout its run, since everyone was at the same point in the story, which made it easier to discuss and recommend. Things like Pietro's appearance would not have left as much of an impact as it did if you could find out exactly who he was by staying up a couple more hours and binging the rest. That success seems to be influencing how other platforms release their shows, which may annoy some viewers, but I say, thank God. I much prefer watching shows this way. It helps me really appreciate them. Though that lack of content from an audience that's used to getting 3 entries in their franchise a year at least, and having to wait week by week for new installments, led to some wild theorizing. And while some of it was well thought out and rational, there were some that were out there. Looking at you, Mephisto believers. On top of how much different this show was at first, reception like that may have raised people's expectations, and thus led to some viewers being disappointed by the story once it was completed. But I think history is going to look back fondly on WandaVision as one of the most creative, spellbinding, and emotional entries in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like I said, I was very skeptical about the show and its premise going in, but I am incredibly happy to say I was very wrong about what this show would have to offer. Wanda may not have gotten the happy ending in this chapter of her story, but her transformation into the Scarlet Witch was incredibly memorable, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how Multiverse of Madness builds on this. Thanks for watching, everyone. Definitely let me know what you thought of the show in the comments below. That's why the series is called Let's Talk About. I want to give a very special thanks to my patrons who help support my content, including David L. Sproul, Sebastian Canino of Cinemageddon Reviews, Chelsea Crandall, Hawk Hero, Jinx Productions, and Wait in the Wings. If you'd like to join these fine people in supporting my content while getting cool exclusive perks, you can check out my Patreon page at the link in the description, as well as my other social media if you'd like to check out any of those. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you guys next time.
Why are you mining my life for classic sitcom scenarios?